Hello and welcome to We Lead, the female archetypes of leadership. What I, along with some co-conspirators, hope to do through this series is to assist you to see how the social conditioning of women can be leveraged as a strength. We will do this through the lens of 6 female archetypes: the queen, the seer, the mother, the heroine, the warrior, and the sage. By the end of the series, we will have unpacked how the 6 archetypes uniquely contribute to leadership behavior, and we will have established how collectively they create a powerful palette of approaches from which a strong leader draws from in her times of need. To introduce the show, I'm joined today by Dr. Leslie Knutson, a clinical psychologist originally from Los Angeles, who today resides in Milan, Italy, and is the founder of the American Counseling Center. Leslie, hi, it's really great to see you. Thanks for joining me. Each time I read your bio, as a psychotherapist, I read your bio and I have to admit to fangirling a little bit and being in absolute awe of your experience. So I wondered if you would perhaps share with the audience just a little bit about your background and what brought you here today.
Sure, absolutely. So after graduating with my PhD, I had a male supervisor at the clinic I was working who kind of said, why don't you look at criminal justice? They're looking for women, thanks to Clinton's new initiative to bring women in power in government. And, for me, it wasn't something that I was thinking about. I was more of kind of a girly girl, and it kind of felt really out of my comfort zone. But I applied and was hired by the Department of Justice Bureau of Prisons to work at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. And worked my way up from being a staff psychologist to the chief psychologist of the detention center. And it was a very interesting time for me clinically. I was one of very few females and worked with a lot of males, correctional officers, et cetera. And I have to say that without really understanding at the time, I really kind of got to look a lot at female-male roles and leadership, and how did I land in leadership so young as a female? And it was an extremely exciting, great experience for sure.
Fascinating. Talking about leadership, before coming here today, I shared a couple of articles with you that has helped to inspire this series of We Lead. The first article being from 2018 from Forbes about how management development is failing in America today and called for greater humanity in leadership. Mm-hmm. And then the other article, a 2020 article from Harvard Business Review, talking about the power of female leadership and how countries with women in leadership positions have suffered 6 times fewer confirmed deaths than COVID-19 than countries with governments led by men. I mean, but both of them are just incredible articles. And I just as you read those articles, what came up for you when you think about leadership, and in particular, women in leadership positions?
So I don't think it's any surprise that leadership in corporations is failing, and that employees are wanting to leave their managers and go do something else. It's no surprise to me that entrepreneurialism, both for male and females, are also on the rise and more interesting, that people have more autonomy. I think, I don't know how long ago, but a while ago, the leadership in corporations really, as the article talks about, valued competitiveness, valued a strong sort of masculine leadership. And I don't think that's relevant to how we see how employees want to be hired and work for companies at this point. Mm-hmm. And my sense is that, you know, what's really important to employees now is being able to feel like they're part of something for the greater good, whether it be their social values or the environment. And the function of their level of performance is a function of how they feel like they belong and how they feel like they're working at something that's authentic to what they believe in. So I think it's a moment of real change. And of course, we're seeing that also in terms of all the social justice protests, but it's not a surprise to me. And I think it's a good thing for, you know, it's a good thing for women. It's a good thing for gender. It's a good thing for race, that there's a lot more opportunity to really be able to be in a meaningful work environment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, you say, I heard you say it's not a surprise to me a couple times, and I wondered if you could share why it's not a surprise to you.
I just think there's so much more opportunity for employees out there. Now, I'm not talking about actual job, especially during the pandemic right now, but you graduate now with a very different set of opportunities work-wise. You don't have to be pigeonholed in a very specific place. You can kind of create different paths for yourself. So as a result, I think already we're looking at a more diverse population of both companies and employees. So it's not a surprise to me that the old way of doing corporate work is archaic. And the managers haven't kind of changed their tune because they haven't had to, right? It worked before, so it's going to work again. But certainly, it doesn't surprise me that that's not working and that employees want something that's more diverse and more open to what they believe in.
Yeah. Something about what you're saying, Leslie, reminds me of a piece of research. It's probably a couple decades old now, but still feels like super relevant to me, which is it's written up in a book called First Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham. And there was a piece of research done by Gallup, one of the most far-reaching in terms of the sample base of professional kind of management leadership requirements. And there was a beautiful finding that was published in this book that said people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And that's kind of a little bit about what you're talking to. And I'm always curious about, turnover and not being able to keep teams intact for longer than a year or 2 years. And what do we do in those sorts of situations?
Or even build teams.
Right, exactly. And I wonder, what's your perspective on how women or female identified people are able to fit into that space where that is being made by the requirement for better or different from leaders and from managers to this old, to use your words, archaic kind of way of managing and leading. How do you think women specifically fit into that space well?
Well, I'm going to make sure I understand. Fit into the space of the new business type.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think they're breaking boundaries and starting all over. I mean, I think a part of it is sort of turning it upside down, and I think there's a lot of support for that. I think there's a lot of support to look at things from different perspectives. I think it's also sort of an age thing. I mean, if at a certain, those of us at a certain age, not that I'm putting you in there either, but there is a sense that the younger generation has a whole lot of, I'm going to say, permission to be able to question and sort of talk about doing stuff that is more relevant to what their beliefs are. And I certainly didn't have that growing up in the work environment, working when I did for the government. But I think that you're much more able to do that at this point.
Yeah.
I don't think you're working for the old archaic folks. I think you're looking how to do something on a little more innovative, progressive, non-traditional, which I think is more and more common.
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to thank you for the generous comment about not placing me in a certain age category, but I would like full disclosure right now. I'm working with a system of pulleys and strings to keep this all in place, and a beautiful light ring and a wonderful filter on Zoom. So take all of those things away. Meanwhile, I've got this top on and I'm wearing pajamas underneath the desk, you know, like the kind of
scrolling standard through your Instagram as you're listening.
Exactly.
Yes, I'm aware. I'm doing all the same.
I'm struck by the kind of social conditioning that can happen for women. You know, little girls that are often told to be seen and not heard, and to let other people go first, and to be prim and proper and pretty and polite. And how that kind of conditioning can often lead little girls to place them in secondary positions to little boys, and what happens to those little girls when they grow up to be women, and the dynamics that social conditioning places on them to, you know, to be performative, or in the workplace to don a suit and to be all masculine and bull busting and all of that sort of stuff. And the temptation for women to do that, I see it a lot in my client base. And so often the narrative for at least some of the stuff that I hear is that you know, that social conditioning isn't helpful for women. And talking about turning things on their head, like I want to say, and what I believe, and this is why we're doing this series, is actually that social conditioning can be a strength, is a strength, because there's a bunch of things that I think that the role of the woman in society, I don't know why I did air quotes there, but I just did for the hell of it. The role of the woman in society, actually the skills and the way in which they learn makes them built for and predisposed for leadership positions. And I wonder what you think about that.
So here's the spoiler alert. I was going to say this at a certain other point, but this seems relevant now, which is, I think it's really interesting that you're looking at different archetypes in terms of leadership for women. And the reason is because it offers a smorgasbord of how women can do leadership, that you don't necessarily have to be one certain type, which I think certainly in my earlier career days, I thought there was only one, right? Because that was sort of what it felt appropriate. And what you're saying is pick and choose the different types and use them for whatever is appropriate for the situation in which you're in, if I understand you correctly.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
And wow, that's a really hopeful, useful, and wide-ranging piece of advice, that you don't actually have to be pigeonholed in just the warrior, you know, which often commonly gets kind of thrown around. Right. You sometimes actually need to be the queen, and you sometimes actually need to be the mom too. And I think that's really helpful to women, really helpful. That there is not one right way to do it, but there are lots of different opportunities for you to be authentic and use your strengths in different situations that may not go across the board as a cookie cutter stamp of how you are in every situation.
Yeah, there's I really like to think of these archetypes as different choice points, right? And the development of we one as a leader is, I think, is all about not only becoming increasingly aware of your humanity, but in becoming increasingly aware of the choices that you can make around your behavior and leadership style in a context specific kind of way.
Right. And for me, it brings up another really clinically very rich and important point, which is part of being healthy is to really understand what it is, what are your limits emotionally in terms of what you sign up to do, and that you have control over how you're going to produce that, how you're going to perform that. No one says it has to be this way. And I think for women especially, that's something that's still kind of a relatively new situation in which you can kind of put boundaries down and kind of decide what's good for you at that moment.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if we could just dive in a little bit because I think both of us have just said, there's choices, and you hinted at the kind of concept of boundaries and being able to, insert yourself into, exit away from different situations. And then I just thought in my head, I wonder if that's totally true for everyone in terms of their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the pressures that are placed on leaders in the workplace to never say no, to always have the answers, and to kind of almost be that superwoman, superhero kind of all person to everyone. And I wonder, I also think that it becomes increasingly difficult for women in a straight, white, male-dominated landscape to be empowered in those choices that they want to make, and to come from a place of center rather than a place of fear. And I wonder if you had a take on any of that.
Well, to begin, I completely agree with you that it's not easy to come up with, to be able to use your boundaries to look at choices in all situations. And again, I think it's also an age issue. I think it's also, experience issue as you kind of go along. But, the other thing that's very interesting to me with Women Entrepreneurs Global is that there's a real key ingredient in terms of mentoring. So part of what your series is doing is, allowing women to hear that there are different ways of being able to do things that is emotionally congruent with what your capabilities and needs are. And so hopefully some of the choice and decision about where you put down boundaries and what you do is also something that is mentored and offered as a legitimate way for you to be in the world. I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So you've mentioned a couple of them already, but this series is about 6 particular female archetypes: the queen, the seer, the mother, the heroine, the warrior, and the sage. As a clinical psychologist, in the world of psychology, archetypes are talked about a lot, but I wonder, in applying these into a business world, into leadership, and just in your own experience, how do you relate to those 6 archetypes? And I wonder whether you would be able to share your take on how these archetypes can be accessed or lived by women.
I do really believe that there are hidden undercurrents psychologically that imprint how you're going to be a leader. And some of those, well, let me just also say it a different way. And that if you are a self-aware person, you can then understand what those undercurrents can, how they can affect you as a leader. Some of it could be good. Some of it could be less good. Some of it could be triggered by past trauma. And I feel like part of it is being comfortable enough to know what your leadership style is, and why it is, and how it functions, and in what areas it's healthy and what areas it's not. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but for me, that's sort of where I start.
Yeah.
In terms of people understanding their leadership template, if you want.
Got it. And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So, obviously I don't talk necessarily about archetypes, but certainly I'm going to go with the queen, who seems very easy to talk about. That, there's a sense of doing too much could also mean that you feel resentful that people are dumping on you. So why do you feel like you have to do so much, Superwoman or Superman? And gosh, where does that come from? And if you're resentful of it, could we do it differently? Could you be a little more, being able to step back and sort of say no to that, or find a different way of going around it?
Yeah. I think what I really resonate with what you're speaking about there, Leslie, is this whole idea around self-awareness and the importance of knowing yourself. And when you know who you are and what your leadership style is, and in fact, that in itself is an entire leadership development workshop. Like, who are you and what is your leadership style are like really big questions that I wonder. Well, I think that not many of us stop and take time to reflect on or answer. But the beauty in knowing who you are and knowing your leadership style is, from where your default position, and therefore you know what your choices are that you can make. And where your stretch is, and where your comfort zone is, and where to lean into, and what you need to purposefully draw down on in terms of the archetypal templates in different times and different situations.
Well, and I would just add that you would also, if you were aware of your leadership style, also know what your limits are. So pretend you're not a conflict-oriented person. Probably for you, conflict is one of those things you're going to back down on pretty quickly because you're uncomfortable with having to be in conflict. Well, it's not always a great way to run a business, right? So how can you kind of work that out where you have, I don't know, a partner who's able to sort of be helping you through a situation of conflict, or getting comfortable with standing up and being in conflict, because actually you're valuable and you need to ask for what you need. And I think the limits are almost, I think that they're as important as knowing what your strengths are. But then you have to really kind of know what your template for being a leader has been, through parents, through mentors, through professors, through whoever sort of kind of showed you what it means to be a leader growing up.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I mean, Leslie, our time together today is coming to a close. I can't believe how quickly that's flown by. It has been, as always, a real treat to chat with you today. Before we close, I wonder if are there any parting thoughts that you came here wishing to share that you haven't been able to share yet?
So I was going to say, in my opinion, diversity begets diversity. And I think one of the really important thing in terms of the women who were able to reduce the COVID virus, I think it's pretty clear that, like the bilingual child who has two separate languages and cultures on board, and the research shows that they're better decision makers than the sole one language kid, diversity brings out different ways of problem solving, which makes businesses and governments and life in general easier to navigate and generally more effective.
Beautiful. Leslie, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Today, and I'm looking forward to catching up the next time we see each other.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.